This is a session that I sort of captioned as reporter to reporter, but we're going to make it whatever you want it to be at this point. All of you here work the same beat, or at least that's what you said when you applied. But your jobs are likely very, very different. How you work largely depends on the mission of your organization and the audiences they serve. Recognizing that, we've drawn Statehouse reporters from local, regional, national outlets to discuss their strategies for covering the politics and policy that resonates for their audiences. We have, leading this discussion this morning is an old friend of mine, Ricardo Pimentel, a longtime columnist whose work I'm sure you're all familiar with. Ricardo, you want to pop your hand up? We have Megan O'Matz of ProPublica, Patrick Marley of the Washington Post, Molly Beck of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and Emily Fannin of CBS 58. I'll leave it in the capable hands of Ricardo Pimentel, and then we'll open it for questions.
Well, good morning. Good morning, panelists. Piggybacking on what Kevin said, you all come from very different entities. You're in size, in business models, and in type of media. Tell us what different missions come with those differences. What's your mandate? Well, we'll start this way, and then we'll come back this way.
Sure. So I've been at the Washington Post for about a year. I'm on the democracy team. We cover voting issues and attempts to subvert democracy. You might have seen a little bit of that in recent years. Before that, I was at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel working with Molly. I was there for 18 years as a Statehouse reporter, so based in Madison for the Milwaukee paper. So, I for a long time had the beat that all of you have. Now, it intersects with state governments a lot, but it's not strictly a Statehouse beat. It's focused on the upper Midwest and election issues there. So, one of the big differences as I adjusted to working for a national newspaper is, at the Journal-Sentinel, we would cover every aspect. Right now, I think you heard from Megan Wolf the other day. She got fired. Molly had this great run of stories about they're thinking about firing Megan Wolf. Here's how the process works. They're having a hearing. It's unclear if she's going to go, and all these developments of the stories that went on. For our audience, they're not going to be interested in that. So we've done one story on it. It was the day that she was fired allegedly fired, purportedly fired by the state Senate. And so you sort of have to pick your places, and that's been an adjustment for me to figure out okay, we see this story, we're going to try to tell it in as big a way as possible. What is the precise time and place to do that?
You have an emphasis on dailies or not so daily? Not so daily.
Okay. Big change from, when I was at the Journal-Sentinel, I'd write 2 or 3 stories a day. Now I have on the day Megan Wolf, they took their vote on Megan Wolf, also Planned Parenthood resumed having abortions in Wisconsin, which they hadn't done since the Dobbs decision. And so I wrote that story too, so I felt like I was back with Molly at the Journal-Sentinel. It's I got to write 2 stories in one day, which normally it's I have a story published once every 2 or 3 weeks now.
Okay. Emily, same question.
Well, I'm a little different than I think everyone on this panel because I work in television. I've been here in Madison as a Statehouse reporter for 6 years. Before that, I was working at the Statehouse in Springfield, Illinois. I think the difference beyond TV is when there are multiple stories a day, I kind of have to pick what's the biggest. On a day like what Patrick just described, a slow news day, joking, with Planned Parenthood, Megan Wolf being fired, it was basically we have to go back to my team and saying, all right, what can I grab here at the Capitol? Lawmaker reaction to Planned Parenthood, but I'm also going to stay on the Megan Wolf story. So that's where my day-to-day kind of changes. Now, there are days where I am reporting on 2 different things in 2 different shows. So we have a 4 o'clock, we have a 5 o'clock, we have a 9 and 10. Other stations have even more newscasts than that. So I might be talking about something at noon and then doing a different story at 9 p.m. If it's a very busy day. Now, if it's a session day when lawmakers are in session, there could be 2 big stories that are happening, or even 3 big bills that they're voting on. I would decide probably to hit on all 3, but the challenge is I have a minute 15 to tell that to my audience. So I try to manage it as best as possible. And it's difficult. I mean, there's days that I know me and Molly work in the Capitol press room where she's writing up 4 stories, but I just have to write that for news first, and then I'll get to web later. So it's just a little bit different environment of how I manage my day-to-day.
Molly?
So I work at the state's largest newspaper, and I would say a priority of the newspaper is politics coverage, and that's largely a function of how crazy it is here all the time, but also because of Wisconsin's role in the national political conversation. So, especially when Patrick was here, like we were just writing like multiple stories every single day, all the time, and it's just nonstop. But I think like if I had to say like what our purpose is, it's to get the news to people first and to tell people what's going on that maybe other outlets aren't telling you, because we have a really experienced politics team. I think that's the value of our newspaper. That's my goal every day, is to find things that readers don't know about, to put things into context that haven't been put into context before, things like that. It sounds basic, but that's what we're striving to do every day.
Are you looking for Milwaukee-centric stories or state
Both,
stories?
yeah. So we try to balance that. We are feeding all of the Gannett papers the Statehouse coverage, so I would say that most of what we do is like a statewide focus, but we do try to also break out Milwaukee news or write a story in a way that tells Milwaukee readers how it affects them,
Right.
Whereas like somebody who works at a Madison paper would write it a little bit differently.
Megan.
I write for ProPublica, and we're a national investigative news outlet, and we partner with other news organizations around the country. I have been in Wisconsin only about 2 years now. I came from Florida, and so finding we don't do daily breaking news. So finding the exact lane for ProPublica has been interesting and a challenge. And our emphasis is on accountability, and of course, as Patrick was saying, the emphasis on democracy and threats to democracy is really what we're very, very much interested in. And Wisconsin is where a lot of this craziness is happening right now. So I read Patrick and Molly all the time. I'm in awe of what they do and what they have done here. Yeah.
Well, 2 of you have alluded to writing stories about democracy and threats to it, or how it's functioning. How does that look like? How is that different from general Statehouse reporting? Start with you, Mel.
Yes, we're trying to find something extra that we can bring to the coverage, look a little deeper, I'm particularly interested in who are the players that are driving these conspiracy theories, what is their background, what are their motives. So just in order for me to learn who that is as a new person to this state has involved me making a lot of spreadsheets on names of who is promoting the conspiracy theories, who are the monitors of the democracy and things, who are the Republicans, the Democrats, the podcasts, the radio shows and things that you need to really tap into to find out what's going on. Because as you know, a lot of folks on the extreme right don't have faith in us as mainstream news reporters, and so won't talk with us, and that's a real struggle. And so it's been both a learning curve for me, and also, yes, trying to find how we do bring a wider lens to what's happening and put it in some kind of national perspective.
Molly?
I would say we've been focused on that as maybe our top priority for the last 3 years at the Journal Sentinel. And I think the way our coverage has become more tailored toward that focus is we are maybe writing more basic stories about how voting works, and if you've heard this theory, here's what the facts are for that. Here's what actually happens when you cast your ballot. Where does it go? Who sees it? Things like that. What is Eric? Things like that. And I also think that we're always trying to hold public officials accountable, but anything that is said that is not true, we're going to point it out, and we're going to write a whole story about it, things like that. And I think that's really important. And even, the former president, Lee Key, is still talking about Wisconsin's election as it relates to his loss in 2020, and that's something that we're still writing about. We're still fact-checking that, and I think it's really important to keep doing that.
Yeah, there's still even many public hearings that are happening at the Statehouse right now about voting rules, and it's a lot of, I guess, from the frustrations and those who are unhappy with the outcome of the 2020 election. Like Molly mentioned, Trump will still mention Wisconsin in many of his stump speeches. And even as a TV outlet, any chance I talk to someone who has, promoted conspiracy theories or even has floated the idea of impeaching our new incoming, she was already elected, she's on the bench, State Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasiewicz. Every time I talk to a Republican, I feel like it's my job to bring up that question, because that is something that has been circulating in a lot of Republican circles right now. And anytime I get a chance to talk to someone, it's almost just keeping a tally and keeping notes of who has said this and getting them on camera and what are their thoughts about these certain things, and monitoring whether they still are kind of on that extreme far right on certain election theories, or have they changed their mind over the years?
Well, it's really important right now, especially you guys heard from Megan Wolf, and that effort to remove her from her job is rooted in things that are not true, or things that don't have complete context, or the full pictures, they're not bringing up the full picture. There was a bunch of people that made decisions, and she implemented what those decisions were, but she's being blamed for that. And that is, that's a policy or a legislative discussion. But I think it's our role to explain, here's what actually happened. Here's, the things that you think happened. If it didn't happen, here's what actually happened, things like that. We're still writing
And
the
also,
stories.
I am shocked that falsehoods come out of the state. But Patrick, how does the Washington Post have you covered democracy?
Well, and so they created this team that I'm on a little over a year ago, year and a half, 2 years ago. They had a team that wrote all about what happened in 2020, Trump's lies about the election, efforts to undermine the results. But after, in the aftermath of that election, they said, we're going to have another presidential election, and these false claims about elections don't seem to be going away. How are we going to approach that? And so they created this team that's, I'm here in the upper Midwest. We have someone in Phoenix, which you all remember the Arizona so-called audit that lasted forever, and was a hotbed of all sorts of crazy claims, including that bamboo fibers somehow were embedded in ballots, and that showed that these ballots were imported from China or some crazy thing like that. So so they have a bigger team in DC. We've got people out in the States who are watching this stuff, and we just think it's important, as the other three said, to just let people know what's true, what's false, what the true mechanics are of elections, why you get, in some states like Wisconsin, the results come in very late at night from the urban centers, which are very democratic, that it's not a ballot dump, that they're not inventing ballots. I mean, there's so many mistruths out there that it is a little bit like whack-a-mole, but it's important to let people know what the actual facts are.
Well, I was going to ask a question about how responsive people are according to which organization you work for. But given that each of you essentially said, if someone lies, you're going to call them on it, does that influence whether they call you back later?
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, that's the I guess, a price to pay if they won't, you know, if they're going to lie to me and I'm going to tell people they lied and then they won't talk to me, I guess I just have to live with that, right? I mean, I'm certainly happy to have it out with anybody who we quote in a source. He's definitely push back when you're interviewing them and they're making these claims. I mean, some of the people who promote this, they just almost wear it as a badge of honor. Well, you're the mainstream media, you're going to call us a conspiracy theorist, that's fine. I'm here to tell you the real truth. And I mean, there's enough of them who will call you back. You can get a hold of them. But there's a lot, like Megan said, who just, you know, completely ignore us, and you just got to spend time on Rumble to see what they're thinking.
Are they that brazen on television, on camera?
I think what's changed for me is post-2020, I was a host of a political show that aired in majority of the state, and that was my opportunity to kind of almost have these exchanges. You know, I have the facts in front of me, you know, that's not true. You know, I was proud to do that because someone has to say something, especially if you're on TV and having someone spew a lot of, you know, lies, let's be honest. I think what's changed now is I think there's still these conversations, but from a TV market, I decide, do I put this on TV? And if I do, I better be explaining the facts behind that of, you know, I mean, even like people wanting to eliminate Eric, or people were ballot stuffing, and Milwaukee's results were so late, so there has to be, you know, some reason behind that when they added. So it's almost a fine line, but it's a story that we're always going to keep talking about. I feel like even after the 2024 election, we could still be talking about this because there's still going to be people that are frustrated with the 2020 outcome. So that's how I approach my stories. I think it really just depends on what sound I use. It could be someone frustrated, like I think the last time I put someone up there on TV was during a public hearing about Megan Wolf, where she didn't show to have public testimony, and therefore it turned into a lot of election conspiracy theorists in one room chanting and getting all riled up. But I only chose to use one of them talking about their frustrations with Megan. That, in a sense, could be fair because they were blaming her for the commission's actions that they took for guidelines during the 2020 election, like putting absentee ballots in place, allowing clerks to cure absentee ballots, which means they can write in missing address information. Because I had him use that soundbite, my next line in my story was explaining it wasn't actually Wolf that made these decisions, it was the commission. Still, people are frustrated with her, you know, so it's just kind of picking and choosing what you use. But I will say for over the past few years, it's less and less of putting that on TV, just so it's not so much of these lies out there. But you also have to be fair. There's a lot of people who still believe this, but just explaining that either it's right or wrong.
Molly, do they run the other way when they see you coming?
I think, yes, there are
There are some, yeah.
There are plenty of people that do that. I think because I cover everything in the Capitol, that they maybe will definitely avoid me if I'm trying to reach out for one topic, but won't avoid me if I'm wanting to write about their bill, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know if it's a luxury, but I think that helps a little bit of keeping conversations going, but I mean, like I said, it's still, I would say it's our top priority is to keep on that issue because, I mean, there's still legislation being put forward 3 years later. And for all of 2022, the legislature was talking about decertifying the 2020 election, which is completely impossible to do at that point. But they were having conversations about that in the Capitol, you know, so it's not, I would say that it's helpful to have to like write about other things. So
They can be mad at you for a little bit, but they'll always come back.
Yeah, but
you know,
they see you in the next
right,
conference,
right.
so
They get over it in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, some people do hold grudges, but it takes a while until, hey, actually, can you promote this? You know,
and like Patrick said, I mean, it's
part of
very important to tell people the truth.
True.
So that's, obviously we're going to do that. We're going to pick to do that every time.
Megan, how does accountability work in this context?
Well, Trump's demonizing the press has really had a profound effect on how we do our jobs, especially as we strive so much, all of us, for fairness. You want to know what you don't know. You want people to talk with you on all sides of the issues. And this has been just so totally against the norm. And I've been a longtime reporter. I covered the Statehouse in Harrisburg for many years. At ProPublica, we go to extreme lengths to try to get everybody that we mention in a story to speak to us, including phone calls, emails, certified letters. And so conspiracy theorist folks who don't want to talk with us, they don't respond at all usually. One story I did not too long ago, I did the whole calling, emailing, certified letters. He didn't talk to me. I wrote about him. I met him later at a Senate hearing, handed him my card, said, "I'm Megan from ProPublica." He took my card, threw it on the floor in front of me, which I'd never had happen before. And for a minute, I'm thinking, do I pick it up? And I decided, that costs a couple cents. I'll probably pick it up and give it to someone else. And also, I have one other example for you, which I think is really floored me. For this news story that I'm writing that will publish in a couple days, involves a state lawmaker who I had never spoken with before. Again, I reached her on Sunday. She said, "Oh, I'm bicycling with my kids. I can't talk to you now. Call me tomorrow at lunchtime," which I did. She didn't pick up. I called her later, got her at her office, and she berated me for interrupting her career. And then, so I did my emailing her, "This is what we're going to say in the story about you. Please, I want to hear what your input is. I sincerely want to hear what you have to say." And I got this, she sent me a meme back. Now let me tell you, this is a state lawmaker who is a grown woman that we have elected. And yeah, it's I don't know I didn't even know what this thing was, but it's a distracted boyfriend meme from a few years ago.
Know what that is, yeah.
And it has me labeled as the distracted boyfriend, as journalist, in quotes, Megan O'Mats. And then it has the girl he's admiring saying, "Writing lies about Wisconsin Republicans." And then the girlfriend is labeled the truth. And I have never gotten a response like that from a public official. I don't know if anyone wants to see it, but that we're writing about. And so when you say, and I've even had, again, I'm new here in Wisconsin. It's been hard for me to even just figure out who's who. So I got the Speaker of the Assembly on the phone the other day, and he said, "I won't speak with ProPublica. You are funded by George Soros." And I was, again, we are a mainstream news outlet. He's a public official. He has a responsibility to talk to us and not even say that kind of thing, which isn't, we have lots and lots and lots of donors, and any Soros-related fund is a very small amount of money. So this kind of thing is, it's very challenging, and I encourage you all to do your best to, I don't know, if you have ideas on how to deal with stuff like this, please let me know, because
Keep at it.
Oh, we will. I have a little bit of a problem with that being out there online with, I mean, I don't know. I thought, am I that guy? So.
I used to write immigration columns, and inevitably someone would say, "Go back to Mexico," which is difficult to do since I'm from California. But piggybacking on what Megan said, what's the worst comeback or best comeback that you've had?
Me?
Yeah.
When somebody says something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I really, really try never to engage with stuff like that. I've never seen it be productive ever. when somebody emails me something terrible, but it's like about a fact, I can show them that is wrong. You know, I will do that. But I think it's like they want you to engage, they want you to say something, they want to put it online, they want to send it to the, you know, the radio station, they want to put it on Breitbart, and I just think it's best just never to engage unless you can just like very calmly and soberly like say, here's the facts actually.
It's a rabbit hole.
I will say I actually learned that from Molly when I've had some, you know, you really want to respond, and she's like, don't do it, you know? Like, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it because there's certain individuals and outlets that want you to respond, and it's never going to end well, and it's going to make you look bad. I mean, we all get very nasty emails. It's sadly part of the job. No one's going to be happy with your story, especially in politics. It's either going to come from the right or the left, or just some Joe Schmo that just read your headline. I think that's a problem sometimes too. They'll like just see the TV screen, they'll read that, or they'll just see it on Facebook and they're not reading the article. And I will agree that is the only time that I'll really respond to these emails is that, you know, you said X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, well, if you scroll down to paragraph 4, this is mentioning it here and explains the process. But you kind of just, in this job, you have to have thick skin. Things do get to you. There's sadly death threats in this era of politics, and you kind of just, I mean, I think even just like talking about it with other journalists, because like other people have gone through likely something that you've gone through, and kind of just having that support group with other reporters has helped me personally. But yeah, my best advice is just, you know, swallow it, don't say anything, because even if you respond even on Twitter or something, even if it's a little sassy, one person sees it and they can take that the wrong way. And I think that's just another thing to put in this room. Be very careful what you post on social media. And just scroll through that too sometimes if you've said something in the past.
Right.
And to add to that, like not just what you put on social media, but what you say in a text or email
Oh,
to someone, because
yep.
they can screenshot that. You didn't put it on Twitter, but they just put it on there for you.
Right, and I would say even with like sources, sometimes they want to get something out of you, or like say someone from a state party is just casually talking to you, and they're like, "Hey, wasn't that funny? Isn't that funny?" Because they're making fun of someone else, and you're just kind of like, like, you know, you almost just don't respond because I don't want to engage. I don't want you to see me as that I'm laughing at the other side type of thing. So there's some people that will try to pry that out of you too, and just, you know, stand your ground.
Patrick, of course you're with the Washington Post, you can get hate mail, but let me go in another.
I got worse at the Journal Sentinel, and which I think is because I was writing more. But yeah, or maybe like when you're, I don't know, when you're closer to it, then maybe people are madder. I don't know.
Yeah. So you've each alluded to media bias and essentially that we live in a counterfactual era, that facts to a big segment of the population don't matter. They're facts. Facts matter. So does anybody care about Statehouse reporting? Why I mean, do people read it?
People do read it, but I mean, does anybody care? Does it matter? I mean, that's what keeps you up at night, right? Like, you can't, you're never going to write a story that, like you said, Emily, like that pleases everyone, that everyone's like, that's a great, fair, balanced story. Like, so you gotta shoot for the broad middle, right? Like, will a reasonably minded person, whether they're conservative or liberal or unsure, read your story, learn things, think it's accurate, think that you tried hard to be fair to both sides? Like, that's what you're aiming for, not what somebody on the fringe or somebody who's really deep in the issue and has vested interests. Like, it's easy to trigger those people. And so I think you gotta, you know, like, if I read a story and I don't like it, I move on to the next story. So these people are outliers that we hear from, and if someone reads your story, I mean, we all love it when you get the nice emails, but
right.
You gotta remember there's like lots of people who read your story, think it's good, feel informed by getting it, and they don't write to you. Because I mean, I read great journalism every day. I don't send emails to all the people who do that. So I think, like you say, you just have to have a thick skin and buck it up. Right?
Emily, you think anybody but policy wonks care about what
Well, I do like it's kind of like a PBS, I guess you could say, like a more in-depth, me and another veteran political reporter really dive into a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff, like for a 30-minute segment. That's for that. Those are for those political nerds that love watching that. And I know a lot of staff and lawmakers watch it. But for me, when like you write things, you're like, gosh, are people even going to care? My job every day going into is, why should people care? if it's a story that deals with your tax dollars, I'm driving that in the anchor intro. Like what I want people to do is, I know not a lot of people watch TV anymore, but when you're home, like the saying in TV is that if you're washing dishes and you hear something on TV, what will make someone turn their head? And it's a lot of the times, your tax dollars, your money is being spent on this. And even driving home with, I would say, even the Milwaukee Brewers story. Right now, there's a huge, massive $700 million proposal to do upgrades at AmFam Field. And Milwaukee residents in the county are going to be hit the most after their sales tax just got shot up even more. So that's kind of how I drove that story, is that, once again, Milwaukee residents, you're going to be hit by this bill, and just try to turn heads, in a sense, is what I try to do when I write my stories to begin with.
How do you make them care?
Well,
when I look at our web traffic, which I know is not a measurement of every engagement, but it's like the Packers and us. Like that is what people are reading,
Aaron Rodgers
like
still.
consistently all the time. And so I think that at least in Wisconsin, people are pretty politically engaged and want to know what's going on. And I mean, I cover the Statehouse, but that bleeds into the national political coverage too, and I cover a lot of that too. And so I think there's just a lot of interest here, and also like outside of Wisconsin, about what's going on here. So I do, there are some stories where I'm like, who cares about this? Like this turn of the screw of a lawsuit that no one even knows exists. Like, do I need to write this story? I don't know. But I think here we're lucky to have like readers who are pretty engaged. But like Emily, I try to like find the stories that actually are going to matter to the most amount of people, to focus on.
How does it work for ProPublica?
Well, I think people, they don't know what they don't know. So you have to, like you can say, well, they don't want to read this, but if they don't know what's happening. I mean, we had fake electors in these capitals trying to overthrow democracy, basically, which is astounding, right? And so state government reporting is so essential. And we had the whole wave of years where there were cutbacks and less of this kind of reporting. And look, we had people in state houses that met secretly to try to drop fake certifications for Trump. So, whether people want to read this, it's up to us to find out what's going on, who's doing things that are illegal and totally against democracy, immoral, hurting people. Where's the accountability? And so if you can just really keep that in focus. I know, again, I have a different position coming from ProPublica, but I was a longtime Statehouse reporter in Pennsylvania, and I remember the fire hose of information that's coming at you, and the multiple hearings going on, and press releases, and people targeting each other, and if you really try to look at the particular moment we are in time right now, and look at your Statehouse and how it's contributing to this very dangerous time that we're in, I think it's incredibly important.
One other thing I want to add is also simplification, in a sense of like if there's a lot going on, or if it's the governor's budget address, like titles, I know the JS does this a lot, like here are the 5 takeaways from the governor's budget address. Like those, even when I write those on our site, they do so much better, because it's like, wow, that looks like a quick, easy read, or a quick listen that I can get this in under 1:15 and get a full recap of what happened. So that would be like just another tip, because those are almost sometimes like clickbait that, oh wow, I'll read that because that seems pretty quick.
I love takeaways. Now we're going to open it up to questions. Over here first.
Hi, my name is JC Whittington. I'm with Politico in Washington, D.C. I'm not tied to a state. I cover multiple states, and that has presented a challenge because it's really hard for me to dig in on some of the particulars that may be a little bit more in the weeds, because my focus is so spread, and so I'm like trying to find or make decisions about like the most important stories to tell, as you were sharing. So I was wondering if you could give some advice on, like, because you told me you cover the upper Midwest, so I'm guessing that's more than one state,
Yeah.
right? And so if you could give some advice on like how you're covering multiple states at a time, especially in this new position, because I came from local news where I was covering like DC, Maryland, Virginia, and now I'm covering a much more expansive area. And then also, I'm a video journalist, and so how you're able to make these stories visual.
I don't envy you having to keep track of what 50 legislatures are up to. One of my big challenges is, I know the Wisconsin legislature and its institutions really well because I covered them for almost 20 years. And now I'm also covering Michigan, where I didn't know anybody, don't know how things work there. Even looking up court cases is tricky to figure out what their systems are. So if I had to do another 45 states, I think I'd be in a nervous breakdown. So I guess the thing to do is really to look for trends, right? I wrote a story with a colleague about when Zoe Zephyr in Montana was taken off the floor. She's a trans legislator who they said spoke when she wasn't called upon or whatever it was, and so she was sidelined. It happened right around the same time that they were ousting the Tennessee 2, and then there was a lawmaker in Oklahoma who had also, I can't remember if she was, I guess she was censured. She was a trans lawmaker. So we were able to build this trend story of what's happening. This is happening. All this trans legislation about sports is happening, and so we could sort of find these broader trends, and you could maybe have a real Montana focus on it because Zoe Zephyr was such a, she was having a moment. But you could broaden it out to talk about these other states. So I'd look for things like that. I mean, they're always changing election laws, and there's good groups that focus on different things like, the Voting Rights Lab. They track legislation in every state on voting laws, and they do routine reports. And their organization will be really helpful in saying well, yeah, they're doing this in North Carolina, but it's like what happened in a couple other states. And so I think you can find interest groups like that, the ACLU, NCSL tracks stuff. They're obviously nonpartisan, and find things that are happening. Because you do see a lot of the state legislation come in waves, right? I think the trans legislation is a great example. We saw it happening in Wisconsin. It was 2 or 3 years ago, and it's oh, this is happening in every state. I'd look for that.
Any advice?
Yeah, I would actually just piggyback off that because I've heard this at another conference. Now is your time to meet other people in other states that are covering state government too, and making those contacts, because even calling another reporter, we're all busy, right? It could be beneficial, because I've gotten that call from friends of mine in DC. They're like, what the hell is going on in Wisconsin? I got to report on this, but this is what happened, last week. I'm very confused, and I just, give them, 10 minutes on the phone and try to help them, navigate things. Visually storytelling, very complicated stories. Do you have a graphics department?
We have one.
Okay, yeah, resources are limited. So we have a graphics team, luckily, but that is how I drive a lot of my stories, because it's very wordy. Sometimes it's a lot of money that's involved. So what I try to do is do visual graphics. As I'm talking, things are coming up on screen because they're easier to follow. And sometimes these stories are just not visually sexy, is what they call it in TV, right? It's that's so boring. Even sometimes reporting on lawsuits, it's oh my God, here we go, more file. But even if it's in a lawsuit, what I do is I take excerpts out of it, my graphic team makes it, and kind of makes it more showy, kind of like what you see on national news, where they have more graphics and things that help follow, a viewer can follow along a little bit more easily, so.
Emily, I wanted to ask you, but I guess everyone probably deals with this to some extent. We had candidates in Arizona for legislative office, for statewide office in 2022 that I really wrestled with even taking the time to conduct an interview with them and to put that on air. I think probably the biggest example everyone's heard of is Carrie Lake, who was our gubernatorial candidate. We made the decision, not to invite her on to the airwaves because of the way that she had a pattern of conducting interviews, using it simply as a means not to answer your questions, but to attack you professionally and personally. She had her own camera crew that was following her around, interviewing those as gotcha moments to put on social media. So I just wonder how you, Emily, and others as well, deal with the decision of whether or not to platform someone who isn't going to provide useful information to your listeners or your audience.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Was your decision not to let her on the air live or in any capacity, even a recorded?
We decided it wasn't even worthwhile to try to do a pre-taped interview with her.
I was just going to ask, because that's also like the beauty of editing, right? You can put on what you want to, in a sense. Covering, the thing is, we don't just interview 4 out of 5, so it just looks unfair. So I think my example would be the Republican candidates in our recent governor's race in 2022. There was an election conspiracy theorist in the race, but we still did sit-downs with every candidate. But the difference was, like, election reform was the huge topic in that race, so it was almost natural to talk about that. I think it's almost, you invite whoever this is in the future, be like, hey, we're not gonna talk about this. I would like to talk about X, Y, and Z. But it is a challenge because I've even been in those situations where they turn it on you. Well, you're a liar. And you kind of just have to just sit there. Well, okay, that's your opinion, but I want to talk to you about childcare. I want to talk to you about school funding, and just try and divert them back to that. Because there are going to be people listening to you and they're like, wow, they did a good job with that interview. Because they want to rile you up. They want to get you frustrated. But it's learning throughout the years of how to guide back a conversation. Well, okay, if that's your views, but I'm here to talk to you about this. So I personally have never left anyone out. That's just from my organization, but I understand the struggle, and I think what Carrie Lake did, I mean, that is just a whole nother animal, and I think it will only continue, but just maybe shortening her interview or only talking about certain things would maybe be my advice.
I'm Hannah Wiley with the LA Times, and I've been covering the California Statehouse for about 5 years now. And I've really thought a lot about the idea of thick skin over the past few years. And I would like to say that I have thick skin. But I do think there is a point where we have to acknowledge that thick skin, or our reliance on thick skin, can also paint over some of the things that need to be addressed. Safety concerns, mental health concerns. When I was a SAC-B reporter, I had the luxurious beat of the extremism movement in California and the anti-vaccine movement. And I reported on them for years, and they are excellent lobbyists in the California Capitol. They may not get everything they want, but they are very well known. And I ran several stories over a few years it hit a breaking point where I ran a big story, and they staged a protest at the Capitol about me and my reporting, and I was plastered all over their social media, my face, my headshot. It's with liar painted over it and all of these things. And I remember getting so much encouragement or so much kudos for that big swing and that big story, but I was afraid to tell my editor that I was kind of scared. And I would be at my apartment building, and there would be a car. I remember going home one night after work, and there was a car with a bumper sticker in front of me that had some anti-vaccine information, and I was they found out where I lived, this is it. And I was so paranoid all the time, and I just I really grapple with that. Have that thick skin, be that badass reporter, take those big swings, don't let them discourage you. But I do think that needs to be a larger conversation, especially in Statehouse press corps, where we're now the battlegrounds for misinformation and protests and election denialism and whatnot. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
How do you protect yourselves? Self-care.
If you want to start.
Are you thinking? I frankly, I don't think about it as much. I probably should. I mean, I do live up on the 10th floor, and I think it takes Spider-Man to get up there, so I don't really am grateful for that. Yeah, I feel for you. It does take having a tough skin, and of course you have to look out for your own safety, mental health, exercise, I don't know. I've been in this game so long that it just doesn't, I'm not as worried. If they do that to me, I guess, then thank God I haven't had that happen exactly. If they stage a protest about me in the front of the Capitol, I don't know. That's shocking, but like you said, we'll write about it and move on and take care of your mental health and your safety. And
Molly,
I don't
protect yourself.
Yeah.
I think some good tips are, like Patrick and I would get crazy threats, just crazy stuff, and a few times like we would go to police and they couldn't do anything. There was really nothing to do. But I think it was important to like put these people on their radar. There was one guy who had been to prison for stalking and doing stuff to people, so that was a good idea. I don't know that it made me feel any safer, but it was just something, I guess, if we ended up dead, I don't know, but it was just like something to do, and which is good to like let your bosses know that this is happening. I also think that like last year, my company they bought some, I don't know if it was a service or software or what it was, but like they took all of my personal information off the internet somehow. That was huge because I was getting a lot of emails about like, I know where you live, and
There's something called Delete Me.
Yeah, all of that is really important. I also turn off all notifications on Twitter, so you're not going to see reply. That was like really bringing me down for a long time.
Be toxic, yeah.
And after I've done that, that's helped a ton. If you don't see all the people yelling at you online, it helped. Because for a while it was like I was afraid to even tweet because you get like so much hate back. But that helped a lot. I think it's just like something you have to figure out. Like it's never going to be better. It's just going to get worse. I'm sorry to say. It's just like, especially as a woman.
As I was just going to say, as a woman,
it's bad. And not that Patrick didn't get terrible stuff, but it's different. It's just, it seems, I don't know. It's just worse. And I think, trying to limit your exposure online somehow. I don't post anything personal online anymore. Stuff like that. I know that sounds bad, but I think, trying to make your bosses aware of what you're getting is important. It's just, I haven't, other than like taking all your information off the internet, I haven't seen like a way to really engage law enforcement. Other, like one time my dad was like, I'm going to hire you a security guard, which is ridiculous. But it's like short of that, I'm not really sure what like the best plan is other than those kind of ways. I think like Megan said, like, being able to turn off the job somehow. I know it's really hard to do that when you cover this job because there's something happening all the time, and you're competing, so you want to be first. But I do think it's important to figure out ways to do that and still be, really good at your job. And also like Emily and I just like sit and talk about it all the time, and that really helps,
Woman to woman. To be honest, it is different for us.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of jump in there. First, like, you got to let your managers know that this is happening. I waited for a little bit, and then they got mad. So my address was sent to my boss and some other people, and they didn't see it. And then someone else, like in the newsroom, it's a long story, but like, I was afraid for my safety as well. So it's like, it's not what Molly said, not going to get better, but talking about it, because even talking to my fiance about it, like, he didn't really get it. He's like, oh my God, that's great. No, like, I don't think you understand. Like, this is some scary shit going on. Like, my address is floating around, and I don't know how they got that information. I've moved like 3 times in this city alone. So talking to other journalists who get it, and like, there's been times too where this job gets to you and you think like, is it really worth it? But you have to think back of like those stories that you're so proud of, and like we got to keep doing this job regardless of all the hate that we get. And sadly, I think it has driven some people out of news because it just gets so hard at times, and sometimes it's not worth it putting your family through that, and et cetera. I mean, even politicians, I mean, you know, who get the threats and whatnot. But talking about it, I mean, I always put the plug in talking to a counselor. I mean, I've done that before too, when times are tough, and like, I think we always say, like, the last midterm election was like by far the worst we have ever experienced in our entire lives. Like, Molly's been covering it longer than me, but it was just so nasty. And now counseling is so available. Like, you could just log on with someone who doesn't even get it, but they'll listen to you. So it's helped me.
Patrick, I had cut you off, so did you have
Oh,
anything?
first of all, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you went through that. That sounds extreme.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's okay to be scared. That would terrify me. And you should never be embarrassed about being scared by something. Because sometimes it's like, you know, you can get the same email 10 times and it does nothing, and one day it hits you. So what everyone was saying about having a support group, and I do think it's important to have other fellow journalists, you know, start a group chat, start a one-on-one conversation with somebody, just like, you can't believe the shit that just happened to me, because they understand, you know, if you, spouses, other friends are helpful too, but it really is good to talk to journalists about it. Definitely in that case, I would let editors know if your editors start taking it seriously, because sometimes people are just, you know, if they haven't been reporting in a while, they don't know what it's like, they might not take it seriously, go to a different editor. Like, elevate this stuff, let them know, because like, you want it documented, like maybe they can't do anything, but then the same person does something 3 more times, and it's like, okay, we gotta get a restraining order, right? And if your editors know on the ground floor, they're gonna be more apt to do it the 3rd time it happens, rather than the 3rd time saying like, hey, this guy sent me a thing and it was kind of creepy, and then 2 months later he sent me another thing. But I mean, I totally agree with you too, Emily. Like, we got to keep doing this work. We can't shy away. We can't let those bastards win by bullying and intimidating us.
I think we have time for one more question, and then next door. There.
Perfect. Well, I will keep it short and quick, and maybe it'll help with one more question after that. Emily, local TV news journalist. My name is Monica. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I have a question about kind of with inside the in the weeds a little bit. It sounds like you mostly do wrap packages of the day.
Yeah.
I found myself in this last session, there was a lot happening on varying different subjects, sports betting and medical marijuana literally passing within minutes of each other in separate chambers, kind of thing. And I found myself kind of leaning towards more like live VOSOTs in different shows, less rat packs, but then worrying more about burnout because the producers back at the station don't understand that that means I'm not gonna leave them and anchor VOSOT at the end of the night on all 3 different subjects that I've already been live on at 4, 5, and 6.
Right.
So, all of that really fast thing to
gosh,
say.
I know those days.
Are y'all having conversations, and what's your opinion on breaking out VOSOTs instead of wraps? And what do you think that the value is? And I also wonder too about when we have such limited viewership, is it more helpful to do a wrap of the day where maybe you get that person's attention for your minute 15 versus trying to grab them for 45 here and 45 there?
My first question is, do you have anyone else that will pick up political stories, or
in the evening?
In the evening.
If I pass on to the evening, I can.
Because that's sometimes what I do now. There was a good friend of mine. He came from the same station that I was at before, and he came from a political background. Like, so I almost am like, I could trust AJ to take this for the evening and grow it. So, but like before that, I feel like I didn't have that. It was more waste of my time to explain it to this other reporter of what happened. Here's the sound, blah, blah, blah. So I think you have to, what I do on saying, you said what, gambling, sports betting, and marijuana. I mean, was it final passage in one house? Was it
final of both?
Okay, see that's how I would decipher it. Is like, what just crossed the finish line? Maybe I start with that because this is what's being sent to the governor's desk. Then the breakout is they also pass X, Y, and Z. I mean, I don't know the governor's going to sign them or not. It really just depends what I think also your audience cares about. Marijuana stories do good all the time. I mean, but so does sports betting. So I think it just depends on any given day, but I also don't leave them 7 VOSOTs. Like, that is so much political news that I don't even think a viewer would be so overwhelmed. So it's when there is that much, I pick top 2 or top 3. And then it's just a full screen. Like, you just break out, they also did this, and you have your anchors say, we'll have all this information online. You know, because yes, I understand the struggles of like, you're working all day, you're gathering, and then I gotta sit here for another 2 hours and put it all on the web. But I think web, there's a lot of power in that too. And I even tag out sometimes saying, this is also what happened. You can go to our website or blah, blah, blah. I even do sometimes like explainer videos that now they want me to do on TikTok, which I'm not a huge fan of. But
Good luck.
yeah, but yeah, that's the next era. But yeah, just an idea. Mm-hmm.
All right, maybe one more question. You had your hand up.
Hi, Alex Degman, WBEZ. I wanted to ask Emily a question too about just kind of the broadcast aspect of it. You mentioned that you guys have like 115, 125 to tell a story. I have 50, and that includes anchor intro, so really it's about 43 including soundbite.
50?
50.
Okay, I thought you said 15. I'm like,
Oh, no,
what
no.
story is that?
that is a sentence.
Yeah, right.
So as you're going through these like arguably very complicated topics, there are some days when I'm sitting with an editor like fighting for syllables.
Yeah.
How do you like? I'm not joking. Like I'm literally not
Yeah.
exaggerating. So, how do you break down these complex issues into something that is like that gives a broad overview of the topic so people understand, but there's also the context too. Like, is context possible for people like us? Because we can't always necessarily send people to the web because not everything that's on broadcast is on web. So.
Sure. I mean, I know this like problem all the time because you can't almost get in the weeds. Like you have to take the weeds out of it. Even like describing if there's this powerful committee and there's all these steps that have to go through the process, you can even just summarize it like a powerful committee did this. Just be very quick and brief with it. I hate saying dumbing down in our industry, but sometimes you have to do it. And what I do sometimes is I walk away and I'd be like, if I called my mom right now and needed to explain this story to her, how would I talk it out? Because you're not telling them all the noise that's happening. You're telling them, here's what the story is about, here's what so-and-so said, maybe here's what the other side said, and here's the end game. It's almost like a bouncing ball sometimes as I see it. Like you're trying to just keep telling the story, but in shorter sentences. I know it's not easy, and I don't know if that even gave you a tip, but I try to think of it as if I'm trying to describe it even to my friend. A lot of my friends don't cover or are not in tune with politics, and then trying to describe that to them and why they should care. I mean, you got to go back to that too. Like, why should people even care about this?
Yeah, I guess it's just me coming to terms with the fact that even if it's a complicated subject, like most things in Illinois are, they go back a long way, like previous sessions, and that's just not going in the broadcast
It's
version.
not going in the story. That's the thing. I mean, it sucks because you want to have the full story, but it's just time constraints that we're on. So driving, you got to just pick the best sound bites and write to them.
All right, we're out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to leave it with this. What you do is important. I read it and see it, and what you do is important. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your time.